Dr. Dre's in there with one of the guys from a rap group called Poor, Broke, and Lonely.
Man, Bushwick Bill wasn't your average rapper, you know? Standing barely 3'8", this dude had the heart of a lion and the soul of a poet. Born in Jamaica, raised in Brooklyn, and made in Houston, that mix alone tells you this story's gonna be wild. He was funny, fearless, and real, in a way hip-hop had never seen before. But behind that wild energy was a man fighting demons, fame, pain, and the search for peace. From the hospital bed photo that shocked the world to verses that made us cry and laugh at the same time, Bushwick's life was like a movie. So how did it all go down? Let's get into his story, y'all. Let me know where you're watching this from in the comments. Grab yourself a warm drink, maybe a cup of water or tea. Sit back, and let's start this journey together. Before Bushwick Bill became a legend, before the fame, the controversy, and the eye patch, there was Richard Stephen Shaw. Born on the 8th of December 1966, in Kingston, Jamaica, his life started far from the lights of the stage. His mother was a nurse, his father a preacher, two worlds pulling in different directions. Church discipline on one hand, compassion and care on the other. Little Richard grew up hearing hymns on Sundays and reggae beats on the streets. And man, that combination would shape his rhythm forever. When he was still a boy, his family moved to Brooklyn, New York. The 1,970 neighborhood wasn't easy. Crime, poverty, and hustle all around. For a kid who was different, it was even tougher. You see, Bushwick Bill was born with dwarfism. While other kids grew tall, he stayed small. That difference made him a target. He got teased, laughed at, sometimes worse. But instead of breaking him, it made him sharper. He started using words as weapons. He'd clown back, rhyme back, fight back with his mind. That's where the storyteller in him was born. Music became his escape. Late at night, he'd listen to Bob Marley, then flip over to Sugar Hill Gang or Grandmaster Flash. Reggae gave him spirituality. Hip-hop gave him a voice. That dual energy island soul and New York grit built his identity. He didn't just want to rhyme, he wanted to say something. That's what made Bushwick different, even back then. By his teenage years, he was running around Brooklyn's Bushwick neighborhood, trying to find his place. He'd sneak into clubs, watch local MCs battle, studying every move. People started calling him Little Billy. At first, it was a joke. Then it stuck. He turned it into a badge of pride. Yeah, I'm little, but I'm larger than life. That kind of defiance, man, that's what kept him alive. But life in New York was rough. The streets could swallow you whole. His family worried about the violence and lack of opportunity. So when he got older, he made a move that would change everything. Texas. Around the mid-1980 period, he landed in Houston, a city buzzing with its own flavor. A slower rhythm, but the same hunger. At that time, hip-hop in Texas was still underground, still trying to find its sound. Bill didn't know it yet, but this move would connect him to his destiny. In Houston, he met people who saw beyond his size. They saw his energy, his humor, his mind. He'd crack jokes, freestyle about random things, turn everyday pain into punchlines. Folks loved it. Word started spreading about this small dude with big charisma. The name Bushwick Bill came as a tribute to where he came from, Bushwick, Brooklyn. He carried that name like armor. It reminded him of every fight, every insult, every time he had to prove himself. Bushwick Bill wasn't just a stage name, it was survival, man. In Houston, he worked odd jobs, sold mixtapes, hung around the early circles of Rap-A-Lot Records, a label that would later define Southern rap. He'd hang at clubs, dance, entertain, talk trash. People started noticing. Bushwick wasn't your typical rapper. He was a storyteller, a comic, a philosopher, all in one. And even when he didn't have much, he had confidence. One thing people always said about him, he didn't let his height define him. He walked like he was 6 feet tall, a friend once said. And it was true. Bill had that fearless attitude, like he'd seen the worst already and wasn't scared of anything else. Still, deep down, he was wrestling with big questions: faith, purpose, belonging. Growing up with a preacher father, religion stayed in his blood, even when he was out there living wild. He'd quote Bible verses, then crack jokes right after. He could switch from deep to hilarious in seconds. That unpredictability became his trademark. Looking back, those early years, Jamaica, Brooklyn, then Houston, were the foundation of everything he became. The rhythm of reggae, the hustle of New York, the soul of the South, it all blended into one. Out of that mix came Bushwick Bill, the man who'd soon shake the rap world. He didn't have a plan. He didn't have a blueprint. All he had was a voice loud, raw, and real, and he was about to use it to make history. By the time Bushwick Bill hit Houston in the mid-1980 period, the city's rap scene was just starting to cook. There weren't big record labels or mainstream exposure yet, just hungry kids with drum machines, tapes, and stories to tell. The sound of Texas hip-hop was still finding itself. And in the middle of all that chaos, here comes Bushwick Bill, this small dude with a Brooklyn accent, wild jokes, and that spark that made people stop and listen. At first, he wasn't even trying to be a rapper. He started as a hype man and dancer for Rap-A-Lot Records, the underground label that would later become the heartbeat of Southern rap. He'd show up at the studio, crack jokes, talk trash, and lift everybody's spirits. Man, his energy was contagious. He'd clown on people, but in a way that made them laugh, not mad. You could feel that charisma. That's when he met James Prince, better known as J. Prince, the founder of Rap-A-Lot. Prince saw something different in Bill. While most rappers were trying to act hard, Bill was just being himself, unfiltered, unpredictable, real. He wasn't scared to look crazy if it meant making a point. J. Prince decided to put him with two other rising artists, Scarface and Willie D, and from that moment, history started writing itself. They formed the Ghetto Boys, the group that would change hip-hop forever. Their chemistry was wild, man. Scarface had that deep storytelling voice, Willie D brought the political punch, and Bushwick Bill, he was the chaos, the humor, the dark truth. He said the things no one else would say. When they dropped their early tracks, people didn't know how to react. Some said it was too violent, too graphic. Others said it was genius. But one thing was clear, the Ghetto Boys were raw, fearless, and different. They weren't trying to be New York or LA. They were Houston, straight up. Bushwick's style stood out immediately. He'd flip from serious to funny in a heartbeat, turning pain into punchlines. He didn't just rap about the streets, he lived them. He felt them. His verses were full of contradictions, dark but thoughtful, vulgar but poetic. That was the magic. One of their first major moments came with the album Grip It, on That Other Level in 1989. That record was pure chaos, stories of paranoia, struggle, and street wisdom. It made people uncomfortable because it was too real, and Bushwick's verses hit different. You could hear the pain and the wit fighting each other in every line. By now, the group was starting to gain traction outside Texas. People across the country were like, "Who are these guys?" The answer was simple. The Ghetto Boys were the voice of the South, and Bushwick Bill was their heart. But fame never came easy. The industry didn't know how to handle them. Major labels were hesitant, their lyrics were too raw, their image too controversial, and Bushwick, with his unique look and wild energy, didn't fit the mold. But that's exactly what made him unforgettable. He didn't want to blend in, he wanted to break out. Man, Bushwick could walk into a room full of gangsters and preachers and somehow make both groups laugh. He had that charm, that street preacher vibe, one moment cracking jokes, the next quoting scripture. He'd talk about death, heaven, and hustling all in one breath. It wasn't just rap, it was therapy, performance, confession. People close to him said Bill had two sides. There was the entertainer, wild, loud, full of jokes. And then there was the thinker, quiet, reflective, almost philosophical. He'd question life, fame, and morality like a poet. That duality made his work hit deeper than most. As the Ghetto Boys toured across the country, Bushwick became the face everyone remembered. He'd jump on stage, energy on 100, no fear at all. He'd say crazy stuff, make the crowd laugh, then drop a line so deep it'd silence the room. He turned every performance into a sermon. But behind all that success, the pressure was building. The fame, the money, the lifestyle, it was all new and dangerous. Bushwick started drinking heavy, partying harder. He was still that funny dude, but there was pain behind the laughter. He once said, "I smile because if I don't, I'll cry." That line summed him up perfectly. Still, at this point, he was living his dream. From the kid who got bullied in Brooklyn to rocking stages nationwide, that's a hell of a journey. The small man from Jamaica had become a giant in hip-hop. And yet, the world still didn't fully understand him. They saw the antics, the jokes, the chaos, but they didn't always see the genius. That's the tragedy of being ahead of your time. Bushwick Bill wasn't just part of Ghetto Boys, he was Ghetto Boys, the heart that beat through every dark story they told. Little did anyone know, his biggest moment and his biggest heartbreak were right around the corner. By the early 1990 period, the Ghetto Boys were no longer just a local Houston act, they were a national force. But it wasn't until 1991 that everything changed. That year, they released a song that would become one of the most haunting, thought-provoking, and unforgettable tracks in hip-hop history. Mind Playing Tricks on Me. Man, that record hit different. From the first guitar riff to Bushwick Bill's closing verse, it was pure emotion, raw and unfiltered. It wasn't about bragging, cars, or jewelry. It was about fear, anxiety, paranoia, all the stuff rappers didn't like to talk about back then. These dudes opened up about mental health before it was even a topic in rap. That's why people still feel that song decades later. The beat was slow and eerie, with that Isaac Hayes sample looping like a heartbeat. Scarface laid down verses about trauma and street nightmares. Willie D brought the real-world anger. And then came Bushwick Bill, small in stature but with a verse so powerful it shook the world. His storytelling was cinematic. Him walking down the street on Halloween, shadowboxing demons that weren't really there, ending with that gut punch of a twist, realizing the person he was fighting was himself. That was Bushwick's genius right there. He could take something dark, almost absurd, and make it universal. Everyone knew that feeling, battling your own thoughts, your own guilt, your own pain. His delivery was part comedy, part confession, part therapy. You laughed, but you also thought, damn, that's real. Mind Playing Tricks on Me blew up. It hit #1 on the rap charts, crossed over to MTV, and became a classic overnight. Suddenly, the Ghetto Boys were everywhere on radio, in magazines, on TV shows. Houston was officially on the hip-hop map, and Bushwick Bill was at the center of it. But fame, man, fame always comes with a price. While the world was vibing to their hit, Bill's life behind the scenes was spiraling. He was drinking heavy, getting into fights, running through money, trying to deal with the sudden spotlight. Imagine going from being an outsider all your life to being recognized everywhere but still feeling misunderstood. That messes with your head. At the same time, Bill's image became part of the group's identity. He wasn't just the comic relief. He was the symbol of their truth, the underdog, the survivor, the one who didn't fit the industry mold. People connected to that. They saw his face and saw realness. Still, even as he was becoming iconic, the industry didn't fully know how to handle him. Record execs wanted the crazy little dude. They didn't see the poet, the thinker, the man behind the mask. And Bill? He hated that. He wanted to be respected for his craft, not just his image. Meanwhile, the Geto Boys were touring non-stop, living fast, spending money like there was no tomorrow. It was wild, chaotic, and dangerous. The success of Mind Playing Tricks on Me made them legends, but it also made them targets. They were banned in some states, criticized by politicians, censored by networks. But that just made the fans love them more. For Bushwick, the song became a mirror. Every performance reminded him of what he was really fighting, not enemies, but his own mind. He'd go on stage, do that verse, and you could feel the emotion pouring out. Some nights, it was joy. Other nights, it was pain disguised as performance. People who toured with him said you never knew what version of Bushwick you were going to get. Sometimes he'd be wild and hilarious, other times deep and distant. But that's what made him magnetic. He was real, he couldn't fake it. And man, that authenticity spoke to millions. Mind Playing Tricks on Me wasn't just a song, it was therapy for an entire generation of men who didn't know how to talk about what they were feeling. Rappers from everywhere, from Outkast to Kanye, later said that track changed the way they thought about vulnerability in hip-hop. The Geto Boys followed up with We Can't Be Stopped, an album that solidified their legacy. The title alone said it all. They were unstoppable, unfiltered, and unafraid. And right there in the middle of that project was Bushwick Bill, bringing chaos and comedy and truth in equal measure. But nobody could have guessed what was coming next. An event so wild, so tragic, it would change the group forever and define Bushwick Bill's image for the rest of his life. You see, Bushwick was living his lyrics. His mind really was playing tricks on him. He was torn between being a star and being himself, between the fame and the faith. He loved the spotlight but hated what it did to his soul. That inner war would soon explode into one of the most shocking moments in hip-hop history. He once said in an interview, "I was trying to die but ended up living forever." Nobody knew how literal that statement was until that night. That night Bushwick Bill talked about became one of the most infamous moments in hip-hop history. It was June 1991. Right at the height of the Geto Boys' fame. Bill had been drinking, arguing with his girlfriend, and spiraling mentally. In his own words later, he wasn't trying to die, he was trying to make sure his mother got insurance money. But the company wouldn't pay on suicide. So, in a twisted, tragic way of thinking, he provoked his girlfriend into shooting him. Man, that's heavy. That's pain at its deepest level where you stop fearing death and start negotiating with it. The bullet hit his right eye, and somehow, against all odds, he lived. When the news broke, fans couldn't believe it. The crazy part? A few weeks later, Bushwick was back literally standing in the hospital hallway, posing for the cover of We Can't Be Stopped with Willie D and Scarface pushing him in a wheelchair, the bandage still fresh, and blood still visible. That photo became one of the most shocking and iconic album covers of all time. Some people said it was exploitative, others said it was raw truth. But no matter how you felt, you couldn't ignore it. It forced you to look, to face the cost of fame, the cost of pain, and that's exactly what Bushwick Bill wanted for the world to see him, not the myth. The eye patch, the scars, the stare, it all became part of his legend. He turned trauma into art. But at the same time, the industry turned that image into a marketing tool. They sold records using his pain, but they didn't always honor the man behind it. That's where the injustice began. While other rappers like Tupac and Biggie were praised for their authenticity and darkness, Bushwick was often seen as a sideshow. People laughed at his size, at his antics, but they rarely listened to the depth of what he was saying. It was like they loved the image but ignored the message. He once said, "Everybody saw the picture, but not everybody saw the person." That line hits hard, because it's true. The industry liked to box him in the crazy short rapper, the comic relief. But Bill was a thinker, a philosopher in street clothes. His lyrics were full of insight about life, death, faith, and regret. But you had to really listen to catch it. After We Can't Be Stopped, Bushwick dropped his solo project Little Big Man in 1992. That album showed what he could do on his own storytelling. Humor, pain, all mixed together. Songs like Ever So Clear gave fans a raw look into his psyche. He talked openly about the shooting, the struggle, the guilt. "I died and came back," he said, "and I realized I wasn't done yet." That was real, man. You could feel it in every word. Despite the brilliance of his music, mainstream media never gave Bushwick the same love they gave his peers. There was always that wall. Maybe because he didn't fit the image of what a rap star was supposed to look like. Maybe because he spoke too much truth. Or maybe because the industry never knew how to handle someone that complex half-jester, half-prophet. Still, among fans and fellow artists, his respect was deep. Rappers from all over Scarface, Ice Cube, even Dr. Dre admired his wordplay and fearlessness. He was featured on The Chronic in 1992, delivering that chilling intro to Stranded on Death Row. That voice, man, it was eerie, poetic, unforgettable. You couldn't mistake it for anyone else. But for Bushwick, fame had already lost its shine. He'd seen what it could do, how it glorified your pain but ignored your healing. He was rich, famous, and still hurting. And that's something a lot of artists go through but never say out loud. Bill said it loud. Still, he never stopped creating. He used interviews, shows, and even humor to process his trauma. He could tell a painful story and make you laugh through tears. That's a gift, and that's what made him one of a kind. By the mid-1990 period, Bushwick was both a legend and a mystery. To the fans, he was the little big man. To the industry, he was unpredictable. To himself, he was still searching for peace, for purpose, for something bigger than fame. He once said in an interview, "They call me crazy, but I just see what others can't." And maybe that's why his story hit so hard, because behind all the chaos, there was clarity. Bushwick Bill saw life exactly for what it was: beautiful, painful, and unfair. He was the living proof that you could survive the worst day of your life and still smile after it. After the shooting, Bushwick Bill's life changed forever, not just physically, but spiritually. Losing his right eye wasn't just a scar, man. It was a symbol. He'd literally stared death in the face and lived to talk about it. That kind of experience messes with your mind, especially when the whole world is watching. For a while, he tried to act like everything was cool. He'd show up at shows, rocking the eye patch, cracking jokes, turning his trauma into entertainment. But inside, he was still fighting demons, depression, addiction, guilt. He admitted later that he was haunted by what happened that night. "I wanted to die," he said, "but God said no. Es refo." And that line right there, that became the turning point of his life. Bill started questioning everything. Why was he still here? What was he supposed to do with this second chance? But before he could find those answers, he had to face the chaos that came with fame. Even within the Ghetto Boys, things weren't smooth. The chemistry that made them great on record also made them volatile off stage. Scarface was deep and brooding, Willie D was bold and confrontational, and Bill was unpredictable, a wild card. There were fights, arguments, ego clashes, but no matter how bad it got, when they hit the stage, magic happened. They were like brothers, always fighting, always reconnecting. Still, Bushwick's personal battles kept getting worse. He drank to numb the pain, partied to escape reality. He'd tell people he was fine, but his closest friends knew he was hurting. That mix of trauma, fame, and guilt, it's a dangerous cocktail. At the same time, he started feeling the weight of being misunderstood. The industry only saw the crazy side, the jokes, the antics, but not the man trying to heal. "People laughed when I talked about demons," he said once, "but I was really fighting them." Through all the darkness, though, there was still music. Bushwick poured everything into his lyric. In 1992, his solo debut, Little Big Man, gave fans their first real glimpse into his soul. It wasn't just an album, it was a confession booth. Songs like Ever So Clear told his story straight, no filter, no glorification. He rapped about the night he got shot, his guilt toward his mom, and the aftermath. That track hit people hard because it was so honest. You could feel every emotion: regret, confusion, gratitude. He wasn't playing a character anymore. He was just Bill, the man who lived through hell and came back preaching truth. And that's when fans started to see his genius. He wasn't just another rapper. He was a storyteller, a survivor, a prophet in disguise. But as much as he tried to grow, the streets never let go. Fame brings money, and money brings vultures. There were bad deals, fake friends, constant temptation. And Bill, being the kind of person who gave his heart to everyone, often got hurt the most. He also struggled with his identity, torn between the wild persona that made him famous and the spiritual man he was becoming. He'd go from rapping about the streets one minute to preaching about God the next. That duality confused people, but it made sense to him. He'd always been both sinner and saint. Around the mid-1990 period, the Ghetto Boys reunited several times, but each comeback came with more drama. Bill's behavior could be erratic, sometimes brilliant, sometimes self-destructive. Yet no matter what, when he touched the mic, he delivered. He could make you laugh, cry, and think in one verse. And that's what made him special. His pain was his power. The same trauma that nearly killed him was the thing that made his art timeless. Still, the battle wasn't over. Behind the scenes, Bushwick was trying to clean up. He started exploring religion more seriously, diving deep into the Bible, talking about redemption. He'd tell interviewers that fame had shown him how empty the world could be. "You can be surrounded by people," he said, "and still feel alone." He also became more open about his mental health. Long before it was common for rappers to talk about depression or trauma, Bill spoke it plain. He'd say, "I was broken, but I kept walking." And that's what people loved about him. He didn't fake perfection. He showed his scars. By the late 1990 period, Bushwick had started working on new music that mixed street stories with gospel inspiration. Songs like The Other Level showed a calmer, wiser side of him. He wasn't running from his past anymore. He was trying to make peace with it. Still, that old pain never fully went away. Some nights, he'd drink and fall back into the same darkness he'd been trying to escape. But even then, he never stopped being honest. He'd joke about his struggles, saying, "I'm just a little man trying to fight big problems." That line summed him up perfectly: self-aware, self-deprecating, and deeply human. Through all the chaos, Bushwick Bill never lost his spark. Whether he was on stage, in a church, or just chilling with fans, he radiated realness. People who met him said he was one of the most down-to-earth artists ever, humble, funny, and full of wisdom. But his story wasn't done yet. Just when it seemed like he had found balance, life threw him one final test, one that would show the world the true strength of Bushwick Bill. By the time the 2000 period rolled around, Bushwick Bill had lived 1,000 lives. He had fame, failure, faith, and fear all tangled together. But something changed in him. That wild spark mellowed into reflection. He wasn't chasing the spotlight anymore. He was searching for peace. In interviews during the 2000 and 2010 period, Bill often talked about redemption. He said, "I did a lot of wrong, but I'm trying to make it right." You could tell he meant it. He was performing again, doing small shows, sometimes with the Ghetto Boys, sometimes solo, sometimes even preaching at churches. He'd walk on stage, Bible in one hand, mic in the other, and talk about God, life, and second chances. The crowd might come expecting jokes or wild stories, but they left with wisdom. He also became a voice for little people. For years, his size was used as a punchline in hip-hop, but in his later years, he flipped the script. He talked about what it meant to be different, how society looked at him, and how he turned insecurity into power. "They laughed at me," he said once, "but I turned laughter into applause." Still, behind the renewed energy was a man carrying decades of pain. The drinking never fully stopped, and the lifestyle had taken a toll on his body. He'd lived through violence, depression, and endless stress. But somehow, he kept smiling. Fans who met him described him as kind, humble, and wise a man who had seen everything but still had love for everyone. One story from this period stands out. A fan who met him at a gas station in Texas said Bill was selling gospel CDs out of his trunk. He wasn't ashamed of it. He said, "This is my mission now." That's who Bushwick was. Never too proud to hustle, never too famous to be real. Around 2018, life hit him with the hardest news yet. Doctors diagnosed him with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. It was terminal. When word spread, fans were heartbroken, but Bill didn't want sympathy. In fact, he told TMZ, "Don't pity me, pray for me." He faced death the same way he faced life, head-on, honest, fearless. He talked openly about his illness, saying he wasn't afraid because he had already faced death once. "If I can survive a bullet to the head," he said, "I can face anything." That was Bushwick Bill in one sentence: unbreakable spirit. During those last months, he stayed active. He did interviews, recorded music, and spent time with his family. He said his goal was to leave something behind that mattered. "I don't want people to remember how I died," he said. "I want them to remember how I lived." And man, he meant that. Even when his health declined, he'd show up to shows in a wheelchair or with oxygen tanks. Fans would cry seeing him, but he'd joke about it, lighten the mood, and drop a few deep words before leaving the stage. It was like watching someone who had made peace with the world and with himself. One of his last public appearances was with Willie D and Scarface. They reunited for what felt like a farewell tour. You could feel the brotherhood, the laughter, the memories, the pain. They argued like always, but the love was still there. These three men had been through everything together: fame, fights, funerals, and they knew this was the end of an era. In June 2019, Bushwick Bill passed away in Houston at the age of 52. The news broke hearts across the hip-hop world. Fans flooded social media with tributes. Some posted old photos. Others shared stories like the man who said Bill lived with him for a week, or the woman who remembered being called peppermint by him on a beach. Everyone had a Bushwick Bill story. Scarface said it best: "He wasn't just my brother in music, he was my brother in life." And even after his passing, his spirit stayed alive. Every year, around Halloween, Mind Playing Tricks on Me plays somewhere in a club, on the radio, at a block party, and people nod their heads, remembering that small man with the giant heart. Bushwick's final interviews showed a man who had come full circle from chaos to clarity. He said, "I used to think being famous was the goal. Now I know it's about being faithful." That was his message at the end. Fame fades, faith stays. He never got the full credit he deserved, but maybe that's the beauty of his story. Bushwick Bill didn't need awards or headlines to prove his worth. His legacy lives in the people he touched, the fans, the artists, the dreamers who saw themselves in his struggle. He once said, "I ain't perfect, but I'm proof that God uses broken things." And that's exactly what he was: perfectly imperfect, beautifully broken, and eternally remembered. When Bushwick Bill passed away in 2019, it wasn't just the end of a life, it was the closing chapter of one of hip-hop's most unique stories. But like all true legends, his influence didn't die with him. It kept echoing through the beats, the verses, and the souls of the people who grew up on his words. See, Bushwick Bill wasn't just a rapper, he was a movement. He proved that you didn't have to fit the industry mold to make history. He was a small man who made a big impact. Every line he wrote, every verse he spit, carried a piece of his truth. And that truth still hits hard today. His influence runs deep, especially in Southern hip-hop. Before the Ghetto Boys, the South was often dismissed in rap people, only looked to New York or Los Angeles. But Bill, Scarface, and Willie D kicked down that door. They made Houston the heart of a new sound: slow, heavy, reflective, and raw. Artists like UGK, Outkast, 8 Ball, and MJG, and later Tretha, Truth, and Zero, all built on the foundation they laid. Bushwick's storytelling, that mix of humor, pain, and street wisdom, became a blueprint for generations to follow. And you can hear his DNA all over modern rap. Listen to Kendrick Lamar when he dives into paranoia and spirituality. Hear Tyler, the creator, blending horror, humor, and honesty. Even Tekken 9 Knee and Crazy Bone have mentioned how Bushwick inspired them to speak their truths, no matter how dark or weird it sounded. That's Bushwick's legacy, making it okay to be real, even when real was uncomfortable. Every Halloween, Mind Playing Tricks on Me comes back around, like a haunting reminder of his genius. Radio DJs spin it, fans share it, and younger listeners discover it for the first time, realizing how timeless it is. That beat, that story, that pain, it still hits the same way it did in 1991. The song's message about mental struggle and identity remains more relevant than ever. In a time when everyone talks about mental health in hip-hop, Bushwick Bill was one of the first to live it in his music. But his legacy isn't just musical, it's spiritual too. In his later years, Bushwick became a man of faith, and that transformation touched people who weren't even hip-hop fans. He went from rapping about demons to talking about deliverance. That kind of growth inspired people who were fighting their own battles. Fans often wrote comments like, "He inspired me to change my life," or "He made me feel like I wasn't alone." That's not fame, that's impact. Even his physical presence became symbolic. For so long, people laughed at his size. But Bushwick turned it into strength. He showed the world that you can't measure greatness by height, money, or fame. It's about heart. And man, his heart was bigger than most. There's a reason fans called him the Little Big Man. That nickname wasn't about his body, it was about his soul. Every time he stepped on stage, he owned it. Every time he spoke, people listened. He didn't need to be tall to stand out his words, did that for him. In Houston, Bushwick Bill is still celebrated as a hometown hero. Murals of him can be found in the city, the eye patch, the smile, the stance that said, "Yeah, I've been through hell, but I'm still here." Local radio stations play his music every June. Artists pay homage in interviews. He's part of the city's DNA now, like DJ Screw, Pimp C, and Scarface, forever tied to Houston's legacy. Beyond Houston, his story became a lesson about perseverance. He came from nothing, a poor Jamaican kid, bullied in Brooklyn, doubted in the industry, and still carved his name in history. That's why people love him. He wasn't perfect, but he was real. He made mistakes, owned them, and tried to do better. That honesty is rare, man. His family and fans have continued his message too. His son, Javon Young Lo Shaw, has spoken about keeping his father's name alive through community work and music. And documentaries about the Ghetto Boys always highlight Bill as the heart of the group, the soul who kept it human. Culturally, Bushwick's impact is everywhere. You see it in memes, samples, and references. But more importantly, you feel it in the attitude of artists who dare to be different. He gave people permission to be flawed, to be funny, to be deep all at once. That's something few rappers have ever done so effortlessly. Even today, fans still comment on his videos with stories that sound like gospel. He lived with me once. He prayed with me. He told me to never give up. It's wild how many lives he touched without even realizing it. In the grand story of hip-hop, Bushwick Bill will always stand as the underdog who refused to be underestimated. He wasn't the richest, the tallest, or the most polished, but he was one of the most honest voices the game ever heard. He brought laughter to pain, clarity to chaos, and faith to fear. When people talk about the greats, they usually name Biggie, Pac, Nas, or Jay. But the real ones, the ones who lived through the struggle, they always bring up Bushwick Bill, because he represented something deeper: survival, resilience, and truth. He once said, "I might not get my flowers while I'm alive, but I'll grow gardens when I'm gone." And man, he was right. His garden is still blooming in every artist who keeps it real, every fan who finds courage in his story, and every soul who knows that being underrated doesn't mean being forgotten. Bushwick Bill's body may be gone, but his spirit, it's eternal. His laughter, his words, his pain, they all live on in the rhythm of the culture he helped shape. And somewhere out there, that little man with the big voice is probably smiling, saying, "Told y'all I'd make history." When you look back at Bushwick Bill's story, it's almost impossible not to feel something: admiration, sadness, maybe even disbelief. A man who stood just 3'8" managed to stand taller than most of us ever will. From Kingston to Brooklyn to Houston, he carried the scars of every place he lived and turned them into songs that still echo today. He wasn't perfect, far from it. He was messy, complicated, unpredictable, and raw. But that's what made him real. Bushwick Bill didn't try to be a hero. He didn't hide his pain behind fancy words or PR smiles. He let us see it: the joy, the trauma, the confusion, the wisdom. And in doing so, he gave people permission to embrace their own imperfections. You can't talk about hip-hop honesty without talking about Bushwick Bill. Long before rappers were opening up about mental health, he was putting it all on wax: paranoia, guilt, fear, and hope. He turned his demons into lyrics, his pain into poetry. Songs like Ever So Clear weren't just music, they were confessionals, therapy sessions with a beat. Even in death, his name sparks emotion. Every time Mind Playing Tricks on Me plays, you can feel his presence, that tiny man spitting truth in a world that often didn't want to hear it. That's legacy. That's impact. He made sure you couldn't ignore him. even if you tried. What's wild is how timeless his message feels. We live in a world where people still struggle with identity, depression, addiction, the same demons Bushwick fought decades ago. And through his story, you realize something powerful. Survival is its own form of greatness. He might not have the awards, the Grammys, or the Hollywood treatment, but he has something more meaningful: respect. Real respect. The kind that doesn't fade when the cameras stop rolling. Ask any true hip-hop head, and they'll tell you, Bushwick Bill was the real deal. And maybe that's what being underrated really means: being ahead of your time. People might not get you while you're here, but they'll feel your truth long after you're gone. Bushwick Bill once said, "I ain't scared of death. I've been there already." That line hits different now, because maybe death didn't take him, it just gave his story wings. His voice still moves through speakers, his smile still lives in fan memories, and his lessons still guide those who are lost. So when you think of Bushwick Bill, don't just think of the eye patch or the wild stories. Think of the man who refused to be defined by limits, the one who fell 100 times and still stood up, every single time. He might have been small in size, but his impact was enormous. His truth was too big to fit in a box, too real to fade away. Bushwick Bill will always be remembered as the man who turned pain into power and laughter into legacy. So here's the real question: do y'all think Bushwick Bill ever got the credit he deserved? Or maybe that's not even the point. Maybe his greatness was never meant to be measured by awards, but by the hearts he touched. He might be gone, but every time that beat drops and that voice comes in, this year Halloween fell on a weekend, we remember him, the little big man. The legend who showed us that greatness doesn't need permission. Rest in power, Bushwick Bill. Your mind may have played tricks, but your soul told the truth. Always.